Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Simsation Nation. Even better, this is the season finale, season 5 finale. This is the last episode of this season. We've had some great guests, great topics, and just like every other episode, it's going to be the same on this season finale. So you can see that I've made a few upgrades. I got a few things on that I'm wearing, some extra gear, some new logos, so on and so forth. But more importantly, I've got a really amazing sign behind me that I'm going to talk about here in a second, because the guest that I'm bringing on is the person that actually made this sign for me. Super talented, lots of skills, but I brought him on for a different reason today. He actually sits next to me. He's what I call my office neighbor. We are always in the office talking about different theories, different philosophies, having different conversations about a whole lot of different things. And he'll elaborate on this, but we were kind of sitting in the office one day because he is a pilot, and we were talking about the yoke and the rudder. And I was like, what's that? Because I don't fly anything but a computer desk. And he explained to me the difference between a yoke and a rudder, which are two things that are used in flight. And I was like, man, that would be a good topic to talk about on the podcast. You know, maybe we can apply that to leadership. So here we are. We finally made it happen, and we did it. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce my guest, I'm going to tell you what my topic is today. And it is going to be how the yoke and the rudder can be applied in leadership. What better person to have come on and help me dissect this topic than a pilot, someone that has actually used these type of devices before. Just so happens that our chief of staff with the Joint Staff J5, Colonel Joe Clancy, happens to be a pilot and has used these type of items before to help us unpack what it means to be using a yoke and rudder in leadership. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Colonel Joe Clancy.
Shooter, thanks for having me on. I think this is probably going to be the longest conversation we have without it being interrupted by a phone call. I think it's funny that you mention all those conversations, because I don't think we've ever had one straight through. It usually is over the course of an entire day.
That's true.
It's great to be on. This is interesting because it's my first podcast. So we'll see how this goes.
Very cool. You know, and to your point, you know, for the listeners out there, every single time we get into some type of conversation about a theory or philosophy, either a phone rings, someone comes in the door, or someone calls my name or his name, and we never really get to finish our conversation. So now we're going to finish it today. So I did my research, you know, as a non-pilot, non-flyer, if you will, and I kind of looked up, you know, what a yoke and rudder is. And I don't want to steer your thunder or anything, but I'll let you elaborate a little bit more. And so what I learned is that a yoke is used to move a plane. It can move it directionally, whether it be up or down or left or right. And it's kind of like a steering wheel. And then the rudder, R-U-D-D-E-R, they're more like pedals, and they can actually control the axis or the rotation of the plane. Did I come anywhere even close to getting that right?
You're right. I mean, we have 3 different axes, and that's what the 3 different control on an aircraft. Both the elevator, which controls your pitch up and down, is also controlled by the yoke, as well as the ailerons, which control your right and left turns. The unique one is what we call yaw, and that is, if you think of a straight line up and down, you rotate around that. That's what the rudder controls. So you could be flying along, but have a little bit of the rudder's not centered up properly. And so you could be heading in the right direction, but not quite facing the right direction. And sometimes that's okay, because that's the way that the wind is blowing. And so we call that wind correction. And sometimes it's not right. And that's where you as a pilot are required to correct that. Otherwise, things are just uncomfortable when you're flying. And I think that's a kind of leads into our analogy on leadership.
That is absolutely right. That's perfect. What I just picked up on was that you could be headed in the right direction, but not facing the right direction. Is that what you said?
Absolutely.
That is perfect because I think the things like that can happen in real life. It can happen in leadership. We could be headed in the right direction, but not facing the right direction. And sometimes we have to kind of get ourselves adjusted, if you will. Hence the yoke and the rudder conversation. So that's what
But
we're
along
going to
those
do.
lines, I would also say that there are times where you could be facing the right direction, but not heading the right direction as well.
Ooh, very good. That's why I brought an expert, a subject matter expert, to come on here and help talk about this stuff to make sure that we're on track. So that's what we want to do today. We want to kind of take this metaphor, if you will, of the yoke and the rudder, and kind of frame how it can help with a balanced approach, an adaptable approach, and talk about how focusing on control and direction and balance not only can apply when it comes to flying a plane, but also when it comes to leadership. But before we dive directly into it, I know I've already kind of let the cat out of the bag, if you will, but can you tell us just a little bit about your background and your experience?
So starting all the way back at the beginning, if you will, I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1998, or the late 20th century, if you will, and immediately spent a year in civil engineering, which absolutely loved. I felt like it gave me a great basis to understand what it takes for the flying side of the mission to happen every day. Then I was fortunate to go to pilot training and end up in mobility C-130s for 7 years in 2 different assignments. Was there when 9/11 happened and got to start things off with Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. Prior to that, spent a little time supporting the Bosnia-Kosovo mission. So I've seen different conflicts. Wanted to do something a little bit different and went into special operations doing foreign internal defense. Loved the job. It was an amazing mission going and working with our partner nations and advising them on better ways to employ their militaries to better support their own stability. And then after that, I ended up, I like to call it my staff penance tour, because I had the fortune of flying for almost 14 straight years. And as a result, the Air Force said, you got to spend some time behind the desk. So I spent some time at Air Force Special Operations Headquarters, did a couple other stints in different headquarters, did 12th Air Force's Southern after that, and then was fortunate to be selected for one of the best jobs I believe you can have in the military, and that was commanding a squadron. It was a very unique squadron. I also doubled as a forward operating location installation commander. And I know a lot of people like to joke about this. I was on a 1-year remote to the island of Curacao, which I know sounds like it's such a hardship tour. But it was an amazing experience. I got to command COPS, Intel, worked with a lot of different foreign partners. So got to see a lot of that. And then after that, due to a lot of different things that happened, I ended up in electronic warfare, flying EC-130s for the Air Force. And then eventually got picked up for colonel. And that's how I ended up in the joint staff. Initially, I was there as the strategy integration division chief doing national defense strategy. And then I got pulled up to the front office to be the chief of staff, which I enjoy the job because I think of it as kind of the leader responsible for making sure that the day-to-day operations for the J5 happen and that everybody has the resources they need, as well as making sure that all those people are taken care of, whether it is manning across the J5 or what their future is.
I will tell you, that's a very, very interesting job for sure. I get to witness you do that every day and hearing about your experiences and how you've changed directions and, you've changed your wind speed and all the other stuff based on the different jobs that you've had. And so that actually helps us to tie in the point that we're here to talk about today, which is really the yoke and rudder concept and how it applies to leadership. So you obviously have been able to use those tools before, but from your perspective, how does a yoke apply to leadership, and how does a rudder apply to leadership?
So when it comes to the yoke, when you're flying an aircraft, if you need to make a turn, you apply, just think of it as a steering wheel, as you mentioned earlier. When you make a turn on the yoke, those responses to the aircraft you see almost immediately. I use a C-130 in particular because that's what I know and love so much. I think 3,000 of my hours have been in that plane. So it uses ailerons. Some other aircraft use different control surfaces, but on an aileron, it's usually very responsive. So you put a turn in, and you're going to start turning. So you can make a correction, if you will, and you're going to start seeing results right away. A rudder, on the other hand, because it's very subtle, one, it's controlled with very little inputs from the front of the aircraft, but the majority of that movement happens at the very back because it's a very large part of the tail, and you put an input in on the pedals, and you are actually controlling a surface all the way in the back. So in some ways, I like to think of that as you make little adjustments on your team, but you're kind of controlling it from the rear. So as you're letting your team move forward from the front, and you're just watching it, making sure that they stay in line, that we're going the right direction and we're facing the right direction to the right objective.
That's good. You have probably heard this phrase just as much as I have, if not more. There's books written about it. It says, leaders lead from the front. What you just mentioned was that sometimes, which is a podcast I recorded not too long ago, lead and or get out of the way. You just mentioned that sometimes you just kind of have to watch your people, send them on their way, and you kind of do it from the rear. What are your thoughts on the difference between leading from the front and the perspective you just provided, which was kind of like leading from the rear, if you will?
I think it's situation dependent, right? You can't always apply a checklist to leadership. And that's no harm about to any leader that writes a book, but I feel that leadership books are kind of hard for me to read because it comes across as I can teach somebody leadership by giving them a checklist. I think it's situation dependent the majority of the time. Sometimes there are objectives that you absolutely need to lead from the front, show that example to your folks and drive the discussions and move them toward the objective. However, there are times when you just need to give them a little bit of steerage and let them move, and you can make some minor corrections along the way, but it lets them get to the objective. And I think that as leaders, that's something that we should be more encouraging of, because we want to develop our replacements. If we're doing our job properly, we want to develop our replacements, and they're not going to have that opportunity unless you give them the chances to lead with you correcting things from the rear, if you will, almost like watching it like a daddy rabbit, making sure that they don't do anything dumb, different, or dangerous, but that they get that chance to go it on their own.
I've, again, heard you say it here. I've witnessed you do it in person. And essentially, when we talk about the yoke and the rudder, and one of them, of course, is helping you to make changes or adjustments with regard to direction. The other one may be with regard to your axis or your rotation. Bottom line is it all helps with the appropriate amount of balance to keep that plane in the air, to keep that plane flying. You've talked about how you help other people do that. But as the pilot, if you will, as the leader, if you will, what do you do to help maintain your own balance as a leader?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. I think as a leader, I've developed through the years of different leadership philosophy than I think the old school mentality is focused on. I try to focus more on people. I think that there's this fine balance I've always taught my pilots and the ones that are coming up to be aircraft commanders, that you have to balance managing your people as well as managing your mission. I look at it from the perspective of, if you've joined the military, you have the motivation to take care of the mission. So my focus is, I guess, a little bit more out of balance, because I focus more on the people part of that, because I want to take care of you, because I know you want to make sure that the mission is a success. So I would almost say that I am, as a leader, a little out of balance from that mission people analogy. But I think that's really provides me the best balance. Unless you were asking about something else.
No, I think you got it. I think leadership, as with anything, is more of an art than a science, which means that not necessarily everything that applies in one situation may apply to the other, which actually is really a really good segue to the next question that I was going to ask you, because with regard to the yoke and the rudder, one of them can make small adjustments. The other one can be huge directional changes. And after Googling you a few times before we started recording, I've seen you standing in front of a flag or taking a guide on not just one, but multiple occasions, meaning that you've led people on multiple occasions. With that, not every situation is one size fits all. So I would imagine you've had to make leadership decisions based on a case-by-case scenario. My point of all of that is to say, how do you know when to make major adjustments versus just the small adjustments as compared to the yoke and rudder concept?
I'll be honest, I didn't. Right. I mean, I think that if you're doing leadership correctly, you're doing it as a team. So sometimes from your experience what adjustments need to be made. But I think the best leadership teams are the ones that act as a team, that you get your senior enlisted advisor or leader and your deputy or your first sergeant, those individuals together, and if you get that counsel, and then ultimately at the end of the day, as the leader, you need to make the final decision. But it shouldn't be made in a vacuum. I feel like that's where a lot of people fail, is where they automatically assume, I'm the guy in charge, I'm the one that needs to make that decision, and I'm going to make it. And they don't get counsel, and sometimes they are missing out on some of those aspects of a situation that they need to know. I always like to tell my people, if you use football as an analogy, you're part of the team that's moving toward the same objective of scoring and winning a game. You always have the 12th man. That's the fan that's sitting there cheering you on, also trying to get you to that objective. I would tell my people, I need a 13th man. And that's the person that's on the other side fighting against you. So I need that other perspective, because sometimes I'm not seeing it. And in meetings, when I was in command, I even got to where sometimes I would have somebody raise their hand and go, "Hey, sir, 13th man." And they would throw out the opposite perspective that I was missing. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing, because then I would have the viewpoint that I wasn't seeing, that I really needed to make sure I had a completely informed decision.
That's really good. 13th man. I might steal that one. I'll use it later.
If you yell that at me in the office, I'm going to be upset.
I just think that's really good, because we're doing all these analogies, with regard to flying planes and tying them into leadership. It's an opportunity to talk about adjusting course and responding to feedback. If you are flying a plane and you're doing something, I would imagine your plane is going to tell you, whether it be with controls, the way that the plane is moving, you're going to know something's not happening the way it's supposed to happen right now. And you're going to make adjustments, and you're going to respond to that feedback. Same thing that you're doing with your 13th man, with your team, you're responding to that feedback. So because you mentioned team before, and you can't do it alone. You can't do it by yourself. So you have to figure out, by listening to that 13th man, listening to that feedback, if you need to change directions or do something different. So I think that's a perfect way for you to just kind of get that feedback and say, you know what I'm doing right now may not necessarily be working for the flight path of this plane. So I need to adjust. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, and if we bring that 13th man idea back to the aircraft, you're right. It's a team sport. It's a full crew that you are on there with. You're not a fighter pilot in the plane by yourself. So as you make adjustments, you've got instruments that sit right in front of you. You can see immediately the changes that you make and what indicators you might have that will tell you whether or not that change is right or wrong. But you also have that indicator of the crew members that are on the plane with you. There have been times where I've flown long, just fat, dumb, and happy, and the loadmaster in the back has gone, "Hey, pilot load, we've got an issue back here," and it's something that you won't see on those indicators in the front. So you got to make sure that your team has that empowerment to be able to speak up and say, "Hey, we got a problem. We need to do something to change our course or adjust the mission to make sure that we at the end are ultimately successful."
Very good. Very good. Once again, similar to flying an aircraft, leadership and control and navigating change and turbulence, you experience all of those things when you're flying an aircraft, but you also experience a lot of those things in leadership. You're going to hit some turbulence and you have to figure out, what am I going to do during these trying times? It's not always clear skies. It's not always smooth sailing. And sometimes once again, you have to make adjustments and with regard to your navigation. So let's use the yoke as an analogy, right? There's going to be some times when you're leading, and you're going to have to maintain tight control over that situation, over that aircraft, over those people that you're leading, over that aircraft that you're flying. But then I imagine there's some times when you have to maybe loosen the grip a little bit. Have you had any type of experience with, hey, this is probably a time for me to kind of loosen up the controls a little?
So I would actually argue that the best flying you'll ever do is when you're relaxed. So there are times when I knew after a flight that it had been a while since I had flown because my hand would hurt because I was holding on too tight. And I think when it comes to leadership, if you hold on too tight to making those decisions, you end up hurting your organization in the long run. It's better. There's a time and place when sometimes you got to take direct control. I've had a couple pretty negative situations in my units where I had to take direct control and go, we are not doing this anymore. This is unacceptable. But the majority of the time, I think that when you fly and you're relaxed and your hands are barely on the controls, you're letting the plane fly what it is trimmed up to fly, because there are these tabs, if you will, that are on the different control surfaces, and you can make a slight trim adjustment. And when you take your hands off the controls, the plane should fly where you have it trimmed up to. It's kind of like leadership, right? Sometimes you got to take your hands off the controls and let things go. And if you've got everything trimmed up properly, then the unit will move the way that you want it to move at the end of the day. So having that ability to release your grip a little bit and relax. If you get your unit to that place, I guarantee you're going to be a happier commander, a leader, officer, and your unit's going to be happier because they have that empowerment to move toward that objective.
Relax. Don't be so tense. Don't be so stiff. And trust your team members. Trust your wingman, if you will. Allow other people the opportunity to lead, which is again another great segue. Because as a pilot, if you happen to be a pilot of an aircraft where you are fortunate enough to have a co-pilot, sometimes you have to relinquish control. If you're taking a very long flight and you're holding that yoke so tightly and your hands are starting to hurt, and it's like, man, this is a super long flight that I would not be able to do by myself. Sometimes you have to relinquish control a little bit. You have to say, hey, co-pilot, you've got the stick, right? So as with the same thing with that adjustment that you have to make, a pilot, a leader, can't control like every aspect of a flight, can't control every aspect of an organization. You've got to rely on instruments, you've got to rely on sensors, your team members, your teammates, co-pilots, so on and so forth. So how do you as a leader distinguish between knowing when to just continue to fly that plane yourself or to turn it over to your co-pilot and just allow your team members around you to take the stick?
Again, it's situation dependent, but I think that when it needs to happen. I think some of the people fight that because again they carry that thought that I'm in charge. I have to always be in charge. But sometimes you just have to take a step back and go, I have a deputy here for a reason. I have a co-pilot here for a reason. They may not have all of the experience that I do, but sometimes as a leader, we forget to take a break. So we need to, hey, Co, I need you to take the controls for a little bit. I need to take a break in the back, or I need to take a drink of water, and you can't do that when you're holding on too tight. So I think you have to be able to relinquish that control to somebody else for a little bit. You have to trust that they're a subject matter expert in their area. I think that a lot of people will hear this in the Air Force. We use the term DO, Director of Operations. The DO is the mission person and the commander is the people person. When I took command, I made that very clear with my DO, and there was never any confusion with our people in our unit as to who the primary was for a certain aspect. But we backed each other up. So if I had to take leave, or if I had to leave for a conference or a site visit to our other forward operating location, he would take the reins of the unit, and he knew enough to be able to make the day-to-day operations work without any interruption. And there was never any confusion as to who was in charge as well. Because as we do in the airplane, when we transfer controls, we announce to the entire crew, co-pilot's aircraft or pilot's aircraft. And so when you're in a unit and you're leading, you make that clear. Hey, the DO is the acting commander for this week because I'm going to be out of town.
You just slightly altered my perspective on something a little bit here, because if you listen to several of my other podcasts, you will have heard me say on multiple occasions, if you have to say you're not it. If you have to walk around saying, I'm the boss, then are you really the boss if you have to walk around saying it? And that has been my philosophy. And I still believe that to a certain extent. But to your point, everything is scenario based and it's case by case. There should never be.
I'm going to agree with you there. Because the part that I didn't tell you is that usually when you do that, if it's the pilot relinquishing control to the co-pilot, it's usually announced by the pilot. Co-pilot's aircraft, and then the co-pilot acknowledges it by saying co-pilot's aircraft. So in those cases, you're absolutely right. If you have to run around saying that you're the one in charge, then sometimes you really aren't in charge. But if somebody says, hey, you're in charge, then you have to acknowledge, hey, I'm in charge.
Oh, see, that was a very small delineation that you just helped me with, because I think that's perfect. Because, when I'm in an airport and I'm waiting on my commercial aircraft to take off, and sometimes the planes are delayed, and you'll see a couple of pilots, a pilot and a co-pilot, leaving one plane to another, and you see them, you just know who they are. You see what they're wearing, you see what them with their little bag. They're not walking through the airport going, I'm the pilot, I'm the pilot, I'm the pilot. We know they're the pilot just because of how they carry themselves, by what they're wearing, what they're doing. We just know they're the pilot. They don't have to walk around saying so. But in the middle of leading and during an actual flight, though, to your point, it is up to the pilot to say, okay, co-pilot, you've got the stick now, and the co-pilot now acknowledging, I've got the stick now, which again, all of these scenarios are coming to my mind as I looked at some of your pictures this morning. When you were assuming command or doing a change of command, you were actually receiving a stick from another officer, and I relinquished control, that kind of thing. I take command, so on and so forth. There's a good analogy of, hey, I am giving you command, versus if you're flying a plane, the co-pilot can't just say, I've got the stick. The pilot has to say, you have control of the airplane. I think that's a good delineation.
Well, but I'm gonna blow your mind a little bit. We have what we call the 2 challenge rule. And that is where sometimes if the person who's got control of the aircraft is doing something wrong, or at least it's perceived incorrectly, it's a responsibility of the other pilot or other crew members to point that out. And that would, when it comes to the two challenge rule, if the co-pilot, for example, and I've done this before, I saw a pilot about to turn the aircraft toward the mountains instead of away from the mountains because it was nighttime. It was extremely busy. We were going into unfamiliar country, and he was about to turn the aircraft left when we needed to turn right. I told him, hey, it's a right turn. He continued and started the turn toward the left. I gave him a second challenge. Hey, you need to turn right. And when he kept turning left, that's when I said, co-pilot's aircraft, grabbed the yoke and turned it to the right and started moving the aircraft away from the danger. So there are times when sometimes you do have to do that and take the control away from somebody to recage them and get them understanding that they weren't seeing everything, or they were a little misguided or disoriented, and you get them on the right path, and then you give them back the control.
That's really good. And I really appreciate you for bringing that up, because I know we're talking about the yoke and rudder in leadership, but I think we could even add on the yoke and rudder of leadership and followership, because sometimes we have to, well, all the time, we should be looking to the left and right and looking at our wingmen and our brothers and sisters that are on the line with us. And we have to be able to pick up on subtle cues. If someone is conducting themselves the same way every day and all of a sudden they're not conducting themselves the way that they're normally conducting themselves, we as the followers also have to look at our leaders and go, hey, sir, ma'am, you all right today? You know, that kind of thing. How about let me go run the squadron today? You know, just like your DO, you know, you had to go take some leave. You can't just be in there every single day, 365 days a year. Your DO is going to have to take control and take charge. And if you're having an off day, we have to be responsible. We should be responsible for looking out for our wingmen. So I appreciate you for bringing up that scenario as well. Again, that's why
I like that point, because something that I think it's leadership that you experience and you learned more from, and that's how you become a better pilot, you become a better leader. So when it comes to flying, you'll start out in a new aircraft. So the C-130, when I first got into training in, I think it was 2000 is when I finally went to Little Rock. I didn't know the plane real well. I didn't understand props very much, because that was actually the first prop I flew after initial training prior to going to pilot training. And it was just another plane to me. But as I flew it more and more, it began to talk to me. And I know that sounds weird, but the more familiar I became with the aircraft, there were subtle nuances of something as simple as a different sound in the engine. I could tell, hey, there's something going on with the number 3.
Something's off.
It would give me an indication, and I would look at the instruments and go, okay, something's wrong with the number 3 eng. What's going on? And other crew members that were experienced could see that as well. And to your point, as you get into a unit or you get into a leadership position, you're not going to know all of your people. You have to get to know your people. And that's where you start seeing those subtle changes and the little comments here or there that speak to you, and you realize, hey, something's not right here. I need to check on that.
So good. So good. This is so good. You know, you're talking about not knowing all of your people, of course, depending upon the size of the unit. You know, if you're flying a private jet that only has a few seats, then, you know, as the pilot and or co-pilot, maybe I'll know those 3 or 4 people that are on that private jet. But if I'm flying a freaking huge carrier aircraft and I have tons and tons of souls on board, or passengers on board, I'm not going to know all those people. Same thing for a unit. You know, when I see a large unit, as much as we'd like to try, we may not necessarily get to know every single aspect of that person. The pilots that we see on Delta, American, and whatnot, they greet us when we get on the planes. They say thank you and goodbye when we get off the planes, but they didn't really know. They didn't know us. They didn't know the passengers. But before those engines actually started, or before the aircraft left to go into the next destination, they knew in their minds, I am still responsible for all of the souls on board. They don't know them, but they're still responsible for all the souls on board. And it's up to you to make sure that you are actually portraying yourself and exhibiting leadership the way that you should to take control of that aircraft and to have enough information and knowledge, self-awareness to know, hey, co-pilot, you've got the stick, because it's not about the pride of that pilot at the time. It's about the souls on the back of that airplane. Just really, really good stuff.
Well, and I think just to make sure that we're really clear, when we sit here and talk about leadership, we're not just talking about command. That's right. Because leadership happens at so many different levels. To your point, I may not know all of the passengers that are on the plane, but I've got a loadmaster that's back there that sees all those passengers and can sense when something's wrong, can sense that a passenger is getting airsick and get over there and make sure he has a bag or she has a bag. And same thing with the various other things that he needs or she needs to take care of those members in the back. So when we talk about these leadership principles, it's not just in command, it's in every aspect of our entities.
That's right.
Organizations.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I know that both are obviously important. Otherwise, they would not exist. But when we talk about the yoke and the rudder, sounds to me, in order to keep the airplane flying the way it's supposed to, you need both. You need both. You need to utilize both. Same thing with leadership as we apply this metaphor. If you had to pick one, with regard to leadership in any organization, military or civilian, do you think it's better for a leader to act more like a yoke or act more like a rudder?
Oh, man, it's like asking me which kid is my favorite. You can't do that. That's not fair. It's situation dependent, but I always lean toward more of a rudder mentality. I like to empower my people to be able to make those changes to move forward, but be able to have enough control from the rear to make the subtle adjustments to make sure that we are on track and we're going toward where we should be at the end of the day. Because if we don't get to that destination, then we've all failed. But we've got to get there as a team.
Very good.
Now, the thing that we haven't mentioned is the elevator, which controls the pitch. And I only bring that up because the elevator is the one that typically exhibits over control, if you will, because you can over control on the other two axes, but it's not as pronounced sometimes. But with respect to the elevator, sometimes you're going up, sometimes you're going down. And as a pilot, you're responsible for making sure that you're flying straight and level. But some people over control because they want to make a correction and they don't see an immediate response. So then they'll continue that correction. And then all of a sudden the plane responds and you're going in the other extreme. So then they control the other direction to counteract that. And they'll go up and down and up and down. And we call that a pilot induced oscillation because you're doing it to yourself. And I think sometimes you see that in leadership, especially where some leaders think, oh, I need to control this. I need to make an adjustment. They don't see a result. So they make a further adjustment before they have a chance to see the results of that adjustment. Wow. So we've kind of ignored the elevator in most of this discussion, but I think that again, at the end of the day, you can't hold one separate from all the others. It's all a team effort amongst not just your crew, but amongst all of the controls on that aircraft and the controls in the situations that you're in as a leader.
No, thanks for incorporating the elevator into this conversation because, again, my brain is automatically thinking about organizations, military or otherwise, and units where there's knee-jerk reactions and we react too harshly or we go too far on an extreme. Let's just say we have a member in our organization that gets a DUI, and all of a sudden where we say, well, no one's going to drive cars to work ever again anymore. And then all of a sudden the morale's horrible and you're going, why is my morale so low? I don't understand why my morale's so low. Well, it's because you made too much of an adjustment and you did a self-induced, you created a self-induced problem on your organization. You tried to fix one thing and you created another problem that made it worse overall. So you have to take things as they come and make gradual adjustments depending upon the situation. So I appreciate you for incorporating that. That's actually really good. We hadn't really talked about the elevator portion of it before. I want to ask you now, do you have any speaking of elevator, closing thoughts, closing advice that you want to provide if you are on the elevator and you're getting ready to go from the bottom to the top of the Burj Khalifa, which I think is the tallest building in the world, and someone asks you, hey, do you have any advice with regard to leadership with this whole yoke and rudder concept? What would you tell them?
I think at the end of the day, we have to learn from everything that we do. So you learn as you go, and you fly every day how much control you need to put in certain situations, and which control you need to apply in certain situations. And it's that experience that helps you in the long run. But it doesn't always mean that you have to be the one controlling to learn things. You learn things from other people's experience as well. I know that people like to make fun of the Air Force pilots because we jokingly go to the bar all the time with each other. But some of the best stories end up giving you an experience that you don't necessarily have to be able to incorporate that into your day to day. I always look back right before September 11th, we had an airplane that lost an engine. And when I say lost an engine, like, it didn't stop running. It actually caught fire and burned away and fell off of the wing of the aircraft.
Wow.
That pilot managed to save the aircraft, bring the whole crew back, and land it. And he was back in the squadron. And I saw him at the duty desk talking about the story. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a lieutenant colonel with nearly 28 years of experience, who was our most experienced C-130 pilot on the base, listening to every single word that he said, because it didn't matter that he had all of that experience. That was an experience he didn't have, and he was always learning. And I think that's the important message, is that you need to always learn in leadership and start applying that, so that when you need to control things with the yoke or with the rudder, or let control go and let your other members of your team, who might be subject matter experts that are better suited to control that, that's where you learn that, because you're always learning.
Very good. Very good. As we wrap up, I recall early on in this recording, early on in this conversation, I asked you a question about you, particularly as a leader, and how you find balance within yourself as a leader, so that you can actually be continuing on your path to leading a great organization or controlling a great aircraft. And one of the things that I know you do, and you're probably humble about, is the fact that you do things that make you as a person, not just as a leader. And that takes me back to the sign that I have over my shoulder here. I know that you have a wonderful hobby, and you create some amazing products. So I want to just offer a quick opportunity for you to just talk about what that is and how people can find you, whatever it may be. Can you just give us a quick synopsis of that?
So I don't mean to insult anybody, but when I left Alaska, I was a little disappointed by the going away gift that I got, because it wasn't the standard going away gift, because we had proceeded to shut down the C-130 operations, and everybody left at the same time, ran out of money. So I kind of felt, one, that the gift that I got was impersonal, and two, I just didn't care for it. So I started I had always loved working with wood and metal. So I started taking that and creating retirement gifts or going away gifts that were more personal. I think very rarely do I do things more than once, because it would mean that it's starting to become mass produced. And that's something that I don't do. On Instagram, that's where my daughter convinced me to start putting my projects, which I'm glad she did, because at first I was resistant to it. But in the long run, it was a great repository for me to be able to show people that ask me, hey, can you make this or something like this? I could pull that up and go, here's what I've done in the past. Is that something close to what you want? And that's why when we were joking about your shield there, which I think your wife said he thinks he's Captain America, and I corrected her and said you're Lieutenant Colonel America. But when that came about, it was one of those things of, hey, you should have one of these. I think that what you do, how you highlight people is extremely important, and I commend you for it. I love the stories that I've seen on your channel, and I wanted you to have something unique to have on the wall. And that's why, and we've talked about the symbolism of it, like the nation. It's if you can't see it in your shot there, but it's very almost grungy metal silver with rivets on it. That's kind of the rough part of it, and then the shield is extremely smooth and polished, and that's how I think of you, right? Like you've seen both ends of the spectrum. You've grown through a lot of adversity, and you're this polished guy now who likes to wear tuxedos on vacation. And so like, that's that personal part that I try to incorporate in all the things that I make. I mean, if people are really interested in seeing some of the stuff that I do, I'm on Instagram on joe.clancy.iii. I really don't do this as a business. I do this for people that I know and I like. And that's where it becomes hard when I've been asked to do things for people I don't know, because I feel like that's where I lose that personality or personal touch on the product.
Absolutely.
And that's why I don't know if I can ever do this as a business, but I may, who knows? It may be a unique business where I tell people I will do something custom for you, but you got to tell me about the person that it's for first.
I love it. I love that the most, because it's not something you're just doing for personal gain. It's just something that's more personal for you. And I love the story behind it. I'm glad you shared it. If nothing else, if folks go out to your IG and they see some of the products you're doing, not necessarily to request services, but to actually see an example of, people see a kernel and they go, man, he's a kernel. Yeah, but this kernel has multiple layers. And this is what he does in his off-duty time. This is what he does to let off steam. I think that's a good example that you will be setting for other people, no matter what. You mentioned other episodes before, and if you have seen, and I know you have, then you know what's coming next. We're going to end our episode with a quick game of What Do You Prefer? Are you ready to play?
I'm ready to play, but you did promise me that I wouldn't look stupid at the end. So
you won't have to worry about that at all. We have an amazing editor, Mike. I want to make sure the kernel doesn't look stupid.
Perfect.
All right. Question number one on What Do You Prefer? You can strike off either Monday or Friday from your work week. Which one would you choose?
I would take off Monday, because everybody's got a case of the Mondays. And by Friday, everybody is happier and ready for the weekend.
Very good. Number two, we just talked about your IG. Would you rather have $20,000 or 2 million Instagram followers?
I would say $20,000, because there's a lot of things that I can do to produce, and I don't really necessarily need the notoriety. I just want the tools to be able to help people better. Very
good. Number three, would you rather talk like Yoda or breathe like Darth Vader?
Oh, see, that one's easy, because I think because of my CPAP, my wife already thinks I breathe like Darth Vader. So.
Oh, that's so good. Number four, would you rather live in a tiny apartment in the city or a house in the middle of nowhere?
It would have to be the house in the middle of nowhere, because one thing that I am cognizant about is I make a lot of noise when it comes to the woodworking I do. And so I'm always concerned that I'm bothering my neighbors. So that would be a perfect setup where I don't have to worry about bothering anybody except for my family.
Perfect. Question number five. I chuckled at this one, and I'm sure you will too, with the kind of work that we do now. But number five, would you rather work a short shift of intense work or a long shift of relatively relaxed work with the same pay?
I think The short shift. I know that sounds crazy, especially since, I mean, for us, it's really long shift of intense work. But I think the short shift, because even though the intensity is rough sometimes, I think that you end up feeling walking away from work every day how much of an impact you made, and that's more gratifying.
That's good. And you're right. We do currently work long shifts of intense work. So we don't have that option. Number 6, would you rather become a grand chess master or an elite kickboxer?
Ooh, I'd go chess master. I think that we underestimate the power of the mind these days.
Very good. Number 7, which would you choose? Being the best at a terrible job or being the worst at your dream job?
I would have to be the best at a terrible job. I think that's something that was incorporated by my parents, especially my mom, who she was Korean. So think Tiger Mom. That's exactly what I grew up with. And it was one of those where I grew up with that excellence in all we do mentality if you're Air Force. And I would have a hard time internally not doing a good job at whatever I'm assigned to do.
It makes sense to me. I like that. Number 8, which would you rather be? A great boss, but a terrible human being, or a bad boss, but a great human being?
I think as much as I'd hate being a bad boss, I'd rather be a good human deep down.
There you go. That's your foundation. Absolutely. Number 9, would you rather play the main character in a bad movie or a supporting role in a good movie?
Supporting role, easy. I think that people need to understand that you can't always be upfront and that attention is on you. Sometimes that you're that rudder controlling things from the back and supporting things to make it happen.
Very good. Last but not least, would you rather never listen to old music again or never listen to new music again?
Never listen to new music. I think the classics are the classics for a reason. Matter of fact, I had 80s on 8 and 90s on 9 playing yesterday when my wife and I were driving around, and loved it.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, Colonel Joe Clancy, sir, thank you for your time. I appreciate you for coming on to help us just kind of apply this yoke and rudder concept, especially from your experience as a pilot and your experience as a leader, and making those two things mesh together to hopefully help some people figure out when to make small adjustments, when to lead from the front, when to lead from the rear, when to change direction and all that good stuff. So I really thank you for your time.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd throw out there is, and you've seen this and heard me say this before. I think, unfortunately, we don't always do a great job of mentoring people, and I think that's why I'm kind of passionate about that. And so, if you have viewers that want to reach out, if they have global, and they can look me up, I'm more than happy to talk about leadership or followership or any ship, if you will, at any time. Offer up the advice that I have and the experience I have so that people can learn from the mistakes that I've made as well as the successes I've had.
Awesome. Thank you for offering yourself up for that, because you're right. It's really important. We need to share, we need to mentor and pay it forward. All the things that we get, we need to pay it forward for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, season finale of season 5 of Simsation Nation. I appreciate you for listening and or viewing. Until next time, until next season, I'm out.